questions? Okay. So I'd love to hear what you guys think, or if you have any questions, totally open. Yeah. Do I need a, oh.
I don't want to take time saying thank you, but thank you. I have a question about something I'm struggling with around pain and suffering in this context. I could feel into and resonate with everything you were saying, and it's something I feel like I want to live into. I struggle with, and I got this struggle with Marion Woodman reading her. Pain as a process of purification and suffering, how to integrate that and honor that in a cosmological way, and then how to coincide that with oppression and people who have experienced a lot of suffering at the hands of oppression. I don't know if you have thought about that or have thoughts about that, but something I'm struggling with. So I'm wondering if you have anything to that.
Sure, I'll do my best. I have a couple thoughts. First of all, something really practical that each one of us can do, and I imagine a lot of us are doing, are grief practices. I have a grief practice where I've made a vow to myself that when grief arises, as soon as it arises, I do my best to make space and time for myself to feel those emotions, the sadness that comes through. I love crying. I love it really more than anything. It feels so cleansing to me. And I think that it's even the next level to be able to do that with somebody else present. And I think that's what we're doing in this community. We're trying to have that emerge here, to create the safety to be witnessed by someone else in our pain and our suffering. That seems to take it to the next level, because when you have two consciousnesses present and one of them is witnessing the other person's pain and suffering, it helps metabolize the pain and incarnate more of that person's experience, because it validates it, because that witness is hopefully being empathetic and loving. And so you're essentially letting yourself know that what you're going through is okay. And normalizing our experiences removes the terror from it and the sense of being inadequate. So something that's problematic about our culture is, because we avoid pain, it's become very melodramatic. Like, it's compounded so much that we have to get through all these layers before we can even get to the core of what the actual pain is. So we have all these self-defense mechanisms that we do to keep us from actually feeling what the core of the pain is. So something that I think is very challenging about our times is we don't live in a culture that supports us feeling our pain and grieving. So when it comes to oppressed people, they're oppressed because the oppressors are trying to evacuate their shame and their pain, and they're aggressing upon the other person and trying to imprison them because they're really imprisoned themselves. So the number one way we communicate how we're feeling to someone else is by making them feel the very way that we're feeling. So one thing that I think we all need to begin to do is recognize that it's actually the oppressed people who are closest to the earth right now. And that's where we're trying to get back to, is closer to the earth. So they're actually the voices that see through the system in a way that the people who haven't been oppressed can't see, because they're unconsciously acting out in their blind spots to oppress those people. So it's actually the oppressed people that we need to make the most space and time for, to sit with and hear their pain. And I think until we do that, we're going to continue to be in this thought loop. That's also another definition of hell. We're in this thought loop, and it's getting really boring, and the tape's running out. So I think that's when kind of radical openings in the system begin to happen. And it's very volcanic, because the pressure, it's more dangerous to be near a volcano that never erupts than one that erupts slowly over time. That's why I like to cry on a weekly basis instead of saving it for that once a year moment. I'm not sure if that entirely answers your question, but those are some thoughts that initially come to mind. Yes.
Do you have anything to say about perhaps the cycle of Saturn returning to Neptune and in the next 10 years, or what the whole cycle might be of moving into a square and then opposition and back to square and then returning?
Sure, I can say a little bit about that. So the Saturn-Neptune conjunction happens approximately every 35 to 37 years. And right now, we're at what's called the waning square. So when you think of the moon, the sun and the moon's relationship, the new moon is a conjunction, and then the first square is the waxing square, and then the opposition of the sun and the moon is what gives us a full moon. Well, we've passed the full moon mark that happened back in 2004 to 2008 of the Saturn square Neptune.
Especially 05 to 07.
Or 05 to 07. So
extending into 04 to 08.
yeah, so they were in an opposition then. So now we're in the waning part of that. And so the next phase will be the conjunction again. And I'll just say one thing that I really appreciate about Dane Rudhyar, an amazing astrologer from the 20th century, and that is he describes the qualities of each of the quadrature angles. And he describes this phase of the waning square of Saturn-Neptune as a crisis in consciousness. Whereas the first square is a crisis in action. That's the Uranus square Pluto. That's the waxing square. We're in that. So a crisis in consciousness is more about integrating all of the lessons that we've learned from the whole cycle up until this point. So looking back at the previous cycles of the Saturn-Neptune, so the conjunction started in the late 80s of this cycle. And you know, there's a new form of consciousness coming in there because it's also the time period of Uranus conjunct Neptune. So I think a lot of the themes of this Saturn-Neptune square is about integrating all of the things that we really learned in the 90s and actually giving them form and incarnating them and sharing them with other people, all of the wisdom of that experiences that we went through then. It's about, did we learn the lessons from it? And if we haven't yet, how can we continue to actually have our lives reflect what was seeded in that conjunction in the late 80s? That's one way to look at it, but I'm also not a mundane astrologer, so I'm not very good at looking at the history and being able to let you know like exactly what happened in each period. But that's some of my sense of it. Are we done? We're kind of out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to take one more, but keep going. Yeah, maybe one more.
I'd like to hear Rick's question.
Okay.
I partly just wanted to praise how articulate and spirited and inspirited your presentation was. It's just so, you know, Dane Rudhyar was the first great astrologer to teach here at Esalen back in the 60s, and it's great to see an emerging great astrologer teaching here at Esalen in the 2010s, 20-teens. And your metaphor of the love affair between the romance between Saturn and Neptune reminds me of something that Joseph Campbell also said here at Esalen, where he said, Christ on the cross reflects eternity's zeal for time, which is exact, you know, Neptune for Saturn. And then just the only last, I just wanted to expand one important differentiation you're making. If you had more time, you probably would have said it, but I think it's important to just add it. And that is simply, you know, when we think about the patriarchal side of Saturn and or the masculine side of Saturn and that connection of it with you know, Father Time, or the punitive side of Yahweh in Genesis, etc. And that's all very clearly part of the Saturn archetype. And then you said how important it is for us to, you know, feminize Saturn and recognize its the things that we can love and in Saturn, etc. And I just want to expand that to hold the fact that, you know, there's also the positive masculine Saturn as well as the problematic feminine Saturn. They always have that balance, which I know you know. And so, for example, just think of that, you know, like the father who is just that, as solid as an oak tree, supporting, you know, or a masculine person or principle that supports that, gives solidity through every storm, whatever. That would be a very much Saturn and very, in this case, masculine. Or you think of that song "Tradition" from the Jewish musical "Fiddler on the Roof." Tradition, and just that celebration of what tradition held for the Jews, holding it together and keeping that kind of nourishing solidity, stability, depth of the past into the present through every suffering. So that's the pot. And just, the Saturn is also, as the feminine, is also the contracting great mother's uterus and the devouring mother and that which separates in order to give us birth. So it's a way of making sure that when we rectify that patriarchal one-sidedness, as you know, all those planets that have masculine names have an equally profound feminine side, and we have to do that. But we also have to keep nuanced and balanced in both the masculine and feminine sides of each of those archetypes, which I know you know all that, but just thought I'd fill it out.
Yeah, to honor always where we come from and to remember the birth pains and labor of what patriarchy has given us, and having gratitude for that and not becoming patriarchal about our new way of being in the world, which is this. Yeah, so it's good to remember to be inclusive and not to...
Yeah. Patriarchy is the 5,000-year birth canal of the great mother goddess.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.